Okay, I have my first confession for the morning is that I'm rather more nervous than I usually am about speaking in public. Normally, because I have an ego the size of Canada, I normally don't mind standing up in front of groups, but this is a little bit more, it's a little bit different for me. And this is the first time I've done something like this because, as Misha said, he asked me to talk about my personal journey. Now, if you want me to talk about theories and evidence and professional things, I can talk to the cows come home, and I'm perfectly confident. But you asked me to talk about myself, and I'm a lot less confident. So this might fall absolutely flat. You might just come to the end of it thinking, that's way too much information you need to know about something. But it does, I hope, have some relevance for the topics we're talking about. And I certainly will get to some professional stuff as well. I'll talk about the rules and what we're trying to do with that. So it won't all be my confessions, but please bear with me on this one. I hope by the end of the talk, this picture will make a little bit more sense. It's not a literal picture, I'm not trying to make any big point, but it is my favourite picture of the moment. And it speaks to me in several ways, and I hope maybe towards the end. Don't think too much about it. It's supposed to be just some background wallpaper, but there is some relevance to it. A directly relevant picture is this one, because wait. Yes. And when I get nervous, I speak faster, so if you keep needing to remind me, feel free. Yeah, do that. Okay, so the more relevant picture is this one. Because this is how I felt about a year and a half ago, after spending about 3 or 4 years in my role as head of Keynote at Oxfam, trying to progress this frames and values agenda. I started the original Common Cause work with Tom Crompton and others from environmental organisations, and with my friend Joe here, we wrote the Defining Frames report, which caused quite a lot of stir and got quite a lot of people excited, and it was all well and good. But then you look, when the rubber hits the road and you actually look for the change, this is what seems to happen. And for reasons that I heard, again, it was a little bit yesterday, a bit deja vu for me, because hearing people stand up and go, but fundraising is the problem. So I spent 3 years talking about the problem of fundraising and then come to Frames and Values. But after, I basically got very burnt out, and I got very, very disillusioned. I found that some of the messages within Frames and Values, some of the deep underlying messages within Common Cause, were actually very difficult for me personally. And I didn't realise this at the time. It's only taken the time since I've had, like we often find in life, the distance from the experience gives you a better perspective and insight. And actually what I found was that messages like charity is a fundamental misconception of the problem was really hard to take on board at a personal level. Because charity was one of those things that growing up I just accepted as one of the good things in life. This is not one of the things I need to question, it's one of those pillars of things that is an expression of our better angels, as Lincoln would say. That is what charity is about. It's about us reaching out to help other people. That's a good thing. The deep personal challenge came to me. Not charity itself I could intellectually discard and not have too much of a problem with. But the idea that something I took so much for granted could be so fundamentally counterproductive led me to, well, if I can throw that out, what else can I throw out? What am I standing on? What solidity can I have in terms of the effort that I use my life force for? What am I here for? What am I doing? And led to all these sorts of kind of existential questions for me. So I was dealing with a kind of a double-pronged problem, which was on the one hand I was just very burnt out. You know, the Sisyphean experience of pushing that rock uphill within a big agency like Oxfam, and I know many of you here would have sat and been tortured through talks of mine when I was doing that. I gave 50-odd talks on frames of values around the UK and all that sort of thing. There was a burnout element to it, but the deeper problem was this one that if charity is bad, what can possibly be good? And I found that was actually quite an existential problem for me. And I was also grappling with the bit more of the human side of what the Common Cause message was. I could take on very easily the intellectual challenge of extrinsic versus intrinsic values. And the intrinsic values, from a logical, rational point of view, are much more logically consistent with the outcomes that we are looking for. There's a profound logical inconsistency with appealing to extrinsic values. If what we are interested in is these pro-social, pro-environmental goals, not a problem at all. Again, the challenge came when I really started to question the meaning and the depth of concepts like compassion and intrinsic motivations. And I realised that I was actually personally standing on very shaky ground on that stuff. And the reason I knew this was because as I was doing all these 50 talks, going around extolling the virtue of these, saying these are the things that should be in our strategies, because logically these are the more powerful appeals for us to be making to people, and these are the ones that are being eroded all around us, and this is calling a cultural crisis. Logical conversation. But inside me there was so much anger. I was feeling anything but compassion for the other people that were the people who were not doing what I wanted them to do. Damn it! I was befuddled by this idea that present a case. We put so much time and effort, both with Common Cause and with Finding Friends, into building an empirically, logistically, logically robust case. A case that your biggest policy brains could not pick apart. Because we didn't want this to be a light trend that just came and went. We needed it to be solid. And even in the face of all that, I was honestly, in my heart of hearts, I was lost when I found people could just dismiss it and could not respond to it. So that was, again, like an existential sort of crisis. And I was also doing a lot of reading about things like, this is from Martin Rees, who's the Astronomer Royal and the President of the Royal Society in the UK. And this is a chance he gives human race of survival in the 21st century. A 50-50 chance. And he's a man of extraordinary abilities and insights, and far better than I obviously ever could do. And again, this is not a professional challenge. This is not a Monday morning, what shall I do challenge. This was hitting me at the level of my heart and my soul. And I was starting to come across people who were on, I had a conversation with another one the other day, an ex-advisor from number 10 Downing Street, from the Conservative Party of all places, who said to me the other day that she's not having children. And there are several reasons about it, but this is one of the reasons why she's not having children. And you always used to, there was a truism. Why should we bring more children to the world? We're such an awful place. But people are actually making profound decisions, lifelong decisions now, because they are seeing and believing ideas like this. That we have a 50-50 chance of survival the next 90 years. So what I realised with all this upheaval was that what I was lacking in myself was a connection, was a rebalancing of what I was relying on in life. We spend an awful lot of time, and we're ferociously rationalist in our society, and I've been relying on lots of very, very smart people to have very, very smart ideas. What I've lost sight of was ideas to do with wisdom. And the difference between being smart and being wise is profound. And actually I found that I had stood so much, put so much of my effort into the smart, that I totally lost contact with the living truth of wisdom. So what is wisdom? Okay, well that's that's a pretty big question in its own right. And there's some, it's basically one of the key questions for philosophy is all about trying to find wisdom, find. ultimate, objective insight, even possibly objective truth. But I quite like Mahatma Gandhi's definition of it, which is knowledge that we have tested and found true on the ambit of experience. And by experience here, we're talking about human experience in the grandest sense. Not about my life experience, or even my grandfather's and my father's and my life experience, but the experience of the human species. What have we had? What knowledge and insight has been tested over and over again and still stood up as being true? And as somebody who kind of lost I was brought up an Anglican, but it was a typical mid-20th century Anglican upbringing, which was kind of none at all. We'd go on church, Christmas and Easter, but there was no real sense of transcendence or God or anything in the family. But I found that as part of this experience, what I found myself doing an awful lot was going back to spiritual teachings, because, well, many reasons. Not least of which is that actually, in many respects, spiritual traditions have kept the best records. And so, if you want to find out what has survived the ages, if you can remove some of the dogma and some of the interpretation, and you can go back to some of the core, you actually find that pretty much everybody said the same damn thing. Gandhi said all religions are different roads that converge on the same point. And I think I've come to believe that. And that was a very shocking realignment of my worldview. I haven't found God. I would still consider myself an agnostic, but I do suddenly have a much more profound respect, or I've learned a much more profound respect for some of the teachings that finally. This is a quote that I like, because I think this goes to the heart of, if you're looking for wisdom, don't look too hard, basically. Wisdom, in many respects, is simplicity. Wisdom is what comes when you have the confidence to strip away the complexity and find out the simple truth right at the heart of the human experience. So we are in a constant race to attain knowledge, and we are obsessed with the new. These are all truisms, we all know this. The consumer society encourages us to value the new over the old, the innovative over the traditional. And actually, especially in our jobs, I think sometimes, where we pay lots of lip service to cultural differences, but sometimes we actually, certainly in the West, we are still actually ferociously tied to the latest data set, the latest idea, the latest trend. And you can't blame us, because that is exactly how we're told good will come. And it's deep in our society. As somebody was saying yesterday, as Harold was saying yesterday, just as the Autobahns are a story about our ability to be mobile, so there is so much in our society that is a story about how new is better than old, in terms of progress and tradition. So to bring it back to Common Cause, well, this is a bit of the good news, because I spent a lot of time, I did basically my own version of the comparative religious studies program, just to give myself a little bit of confidence in making my own decisions. But what I found, that's supposed to be black. It's a big tick. Everything I found, pretty much, when you strip away the things, reinforces the basic message within Common Cause. Common Cause comes at it from a data, psychological, very modernistic sense, and it concludes the intrinsic values are far more powerful and motivating and important, and we'll get better outcomes the extrinsic. And pretty much every religion says the same thing, and every philosophical tradition pretty much says the same thing. So we just learned something that we knew for 90,000 years, to be honest, and it's putting it into a new format to remind us and give it confidence in it. But we can, and that's fine, there's no problem with that. Of course we need to discover these things for ourselves. But I found it incredibly calming to know that we were in line with actually pretty much everybody from Jesus to Confucius to Muhammad to Gandhi to Nelson Mandela, to all of those great moral beacons of humanity. We're perfectly aligned with all that. What have I actually learned? The first thing is, we normally think of meditation as something that touches Buddhism and Hinduism and comes from the East. Actually, every single major religion extols the virtues of meditation. Jesus, in his 40 days in the desert, Prophet Muhammad used to practice this something called halwa, which is seclusion, which he would go into a cave and he would meditate for days and days. Every single tradition basically says meditation is a powerful thing. And it's powerful, and this comes back to wisdom, because what it connects you to is the infinite wisdom that you have inside your own mind, that we are so tuned away from, we are so calibrated not to be able to pick up these days, because there's so much a screech of competition, a screech of noise and newness, and Joe and I were talking this morning about built environments and the noises that they create. So whether it's the noise we're in, or the cultural traditions, slow down.
Yes.
So I found that meditation it's beyond a nice little thing to calm your mind. It's actually an access point I have found it an access point into wisdom. And the other thing that
you're overflowing with compassion.
Yeah, be compassionate about the bad from it. Is compassion. Compassion. When I was doing all the Common Cause and the Finding Frames work, I was going into every meeting saying, it's all about caring for each other, and those are the most powerful things. But as I said, I was feeling so much anger inside. I was not living the compassion. And through the meditative practice, through all this, I've come to realise something, and this is where I might lose some of you, and this is where it becomes uncomfortably vulnerable for me to speak. But if you're asking me to speak truth, then I have to say this. I've come to realise and I've come to believe that compassion is the very source material of existence. Compassion is what we are at our heart. When you strip away all the confusion and the anger and the hatred, what is left is love and compassion. It's not a woolly concept. It's the most powerful thing in the world. It is why we exist. The fact of life is an evidence of compassion. And you can call it compassion, you can call it grace, you can call it love, you can call it all these different things, but the will to live, the will to care for each other, the will to be in community, the will to feel good and to wish others well, all of those things are an expression of compassion, and those are at the heart of the human experience. They are at the heart of life, not just the human experience, but the whole world experience. So, little sermon over there. So, what I've actually come to believe, these things change day to day, but these are very pertinent, these next 6 things, for our work, I think. They're certainly important for my work, but there are things that I've come to believe. The first one is, when we come to thinking about cultural change, structural change, values and frames, we are seriously, I live in a state of near terror sometimes, because I believe, Martin Rees, that we have a 50-50 chance of surviving the 21st century, and there is absolutely no time to waste on this stuff. So it's a reaffirmation, really, for anybody who's been involved in this work and the work that you do on this. Excellent, keep going, don't get put off. This could not be more important, from personal level right through to the uber embarrassingly grand global level. Secondly, radical honesty. I don't know if anybody's read or come across, there's actually a big literature on the concept of radical honesty, and it's wonderful, and I absolutely adore it. But I've realised that why I love it, not only does it allow you to speak what you really believe, and encourage you to speak what you really believe, which will put you into awkward, vulnerable, conflict-based situations in many times. But it's actually the most compassionate thing to do. Compassion demands many things of us, and one of them is truth. And if you can't speak your truth, you are at some level not being compassionate to yourself, and that means you are not being compassionate to the others around you. So in the personal sense, when I see things like these campaigns, I bored people silly over the years with my diatribe against Make Poverty History as a campaign concept, and let's end hunger and all these things. They are profoundly dishonest, because they are promising something they can't deliver. It's a very simple dishonesty, but it's also a very profound dishonesty. And I think I've realised that why this has grated on me so much is not just because of the evidence that comes brightly illuminated from the Frames of Values work about why it is logically inconsistent, but I think it grates on me because it's grated on me at the level of kind of my soul. You cannot lie at that level. You cannot put out those things that are patently untrue and still claim a sense of genuine, honest compassion. So I think compassion and radical honesty go hand in hand. The next one, I'm sure you all know, but one of the lovely story that I only came to very recently, but Socrates was the Oracle of Delphi. You must have heard this, I'm not saying anything you don't know. But the Oracle of Delphi was asked one time who was the wisest man in Athens, and she said, Socrates. And when he was asked why he thought she'd said that, he said, because I'm the only person in Athens who knows he doesn't know anything. And I think that is a really lovely idea. We should be more honest and brave in the face of our ignorance, because our ignorance is near complete. Our ability to understand the ripples of our actions at an individual level, let alone at a global level, we have this much sight in front of us, honestly, in terms of being able to understand it. If you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, we can see through the equivalent of an arrow slit at what reality is. Our human ignorance is so much broader and deeper than we ever give it credit for. And we constantly reach for answers in things like policy and data and things, and that's great, and that's not to say we shouldn't do that, but it's to say at a personal level, let's just be humble about this. We can't save the world. We can engage in an activity that we hope will do some good and it will be wonderful if it does save the world, but we don't know anywhere near enough to do it. And actually, the things that are causing the problems we see are people who do not connect to this truth. People who will make decisions at levels of power, the implications of which they cannot possibly hope to know. And so at some level, that concept of... Okay. This is where, if I haven't lost you already, now I will. And I'm going to use the quantum physics rather than spirituality on this one, because I've done an awful lot of reading across a broad range of topics, and one of the most fascinating topics in the world that I've come across is what is consciousness. It is that divisional point between religion and science. They both basically lose traction on the question of what is consciousness. Personally, I have found that Buddhist philosophy works best for me. I don't say I find it to be incredibly powerful, and what I like about it is that tiny little point of intersection between science and religion that everybody else kind of glosses over, but just says, yeah, no, that's a big question, but we don't need to know. That is that entire ballgame for Buddhists. That is what it's all about, the mind and human consciousness. But anyway, I wasn't going to get into consciousness. Quantum physics. So Einstein once, he observed this thing that drove him nuts through most of his career. He couldn't answer it. And he called it spooky action at a distance. It's now called, more technically called, quantum entanglement. And basically this is the phenomenon of when you have two electrons that have been joined in some formal way and then separated, and you can separate them to near infinite distance, and if you apply a force to one, it will apply instantaneously to the other one as well. What that tells you is there is a connection, a non-material connection between Joe would question that, a non-physical that we can measure connection between these two things. Basically, the quantum field is what I'm talking about. This idea that there is something at the level beneath physicality that, as we can measure it, out of which we all spring. And this leads me to a very comforting conclusion that we constantly talk about an interconnected world. At the most profound level, we're not interconnected. We are one force We are one energy field. And what happens in Darfur, what happens in the melting ice caps, what happens in the slums of Chicago is profoundly happening to me, who is not me. So that kind of screws up. That's where you get into the paradoxes that you always get into with quantum physics, and you often get into with philosophy. But I find that a very comforting thing. We've talked a bit about consumerism. The big lie that we all buy into at some level is that happiness and meaning is about stuff. And I say we all buy into it because if we didn't buy into it, if we didn't believe it, our lives would be extremely different than they are now. We would effortlessly affect, at a species level and at an individual level, we would effortlessly reduce our consumption if we truly believe that to be true. But we don't. So that's me as well. I'm not everybody. None of us truly believe that happiness isn't about stuff at some level. And the media is consumer's handmaiden, consumerism servant. These things, our Facebook, our Twitter feeds, our 24-hour media, they are basically working on the concept that new is better. That it is basically all caught up with that same basic idea. Okay, I'm going to rattle through this next bit and we can talk more about it. Okay. So that's kind of the personal journey that I've been on, and I've kind of come to this kind of quasi-spiritual. I'm not religious, but I am spiritual. What a horribly trendy spiritual, not religious. But I found it has given me, it has reconnected me to the work that we do. Having come from that place with the elephant in his head in the sand, where I was burnt out and I was lost with trying to find what good was, what meaning was for my life. That little journey has taken me back to that. And from a professional angle, I landed up with this, which is this organisation called The Rules. Here's the official blurb. The Rules is a citizen-empowered, I'm not going to make light of it, this is all true. It's a citizen-empowered global campaigning organisation aims to challenge and redistribute power in favour of those among us who are currently most marginalised and impoverished. Our entry point, the lens through which we talk, is global economic inequality, but that is a lens upon which we are having a conversation, a meta-conversation about power, really. We work with existing civil society organisations, social movements, grassroots organisers, to create innovative transformational campaigns that mobilise people to change policy practices. Jargon much? I think I put this up because there are some important things here. So, systemic, everything. I love the fact that we are also now familiar and comfortable talking here. Systems theory coming up a lot in our conversations. That's brilliant. And structural, we also talk about it as well. And I'll tell you what we think is structural, our definition. I'm going to skip through the next one. Don't forget that. This is just a couple of things we did. So I don't know if many of you, we put out this video, we started to talk about what global inequality was, tried to put some new frames on it, and this, it's now about 350,000 views, which is nothing, by the way, compared to one of these videos that's about American inequality, which is now up to 7 million views. So, go figure. Anyway, this little, I stopped at this point because this makes one of the profound points that we're trying to make, which is a question we ask a lot. In this world, when you're talking about inequality and international development particularly, who's really developing who? Because that's what is given in aid every year, and that's what is taken out from the global south in terms of other structural mechanisms, be it transfer pricing, through international trade, rules, illicit finance flights, tax havens. That is the subsidy that the global south is giving the global north. Who's developing who? And so we're trying to upend some of the conversations about global inequality and poverty, and doing it from a global level. This is the example we gave, so I have to talk a little bit about this. This is one of our campaigns that we did in the City of London. We spend a lot of time thinking about frames, and Joe here, who knows the cognitive sciences very well, has done a lot of it. He's a specialist in cognitive linguistics and sciences, helps out a lot. So we one of the things we wanted to do here was start to position the global north as the bad guys in terms of when you talk about corruption. We often talk about, in the mind of the public, you have those tin pot dictators with their big cars and da-da-da. Actually, the heart of corruption is the City of London. And so we call it the tax haven capital of the world, and we did this thing. And we worked with Occupy, we worked with UK Party, we worked with UK citizens. We never do anything on our own. In fact, that is the most branding you will ever see on any of our things, that one down there. So that was and then we took that idea of the tax as something that drives, one of the structural things that drives inequality and poverty. And this is my more favourite. My more favourite? I've been speaking English for 41 years. This is my preferred campaign, actually. This was one we did in Kenya. We got all the grassroots, lots of grassroots organisations and community groups and social movement groups. There are about a dozen of them in the end, most of whom previously hadn't worked on any tax campaigns, but we had lots of community forums, and we talked to them about the reason why tax is an issue that is important for everybody, and if they agree, they can join up, and they did, and they formed a group called Kenya Tax Justice, and what the rules did was provide them with resources. We paid for the materials, we helped do the initial framing, in all the narrative around it. We linked it back to the City of London stuff, because we're trying to build narratives that build over time to increase people's core understanding. We don't have to tell every story with every campaign. We don't have to cross every T and dot every I and join every link with every campaign. We're trying to take the long view and say, these will come in chapters, and over time, what you will see emerging is a different story of poverty. If you see here, Flash, this thing, what we've also done is built some new software called Crowdroom, which works off the idea of missed calls. There you go. And what people can do, what's lovely about this idea is that it's absolutely free to the people who use it, and they don't need internet access. They can do it from a first-generation mobile phone. It's essentially a way of signing a petition that is free to the user, and then we have their number, and then we can SMS them back, and we can get into a conversation with them. But it's lowering the barrier of entry, and it's getting us the ability to get closer to those people who are experiencing the problems. Okay, the final thing I want to tell you is that, so this was originally these probably look very familiar to you as an issue set. These were originally how we organised ourselves, coming out of, coming out of when we first launched. It kind of left us a bit uncomfortable. We didn't think, if I died the next day and gone to heaven and said to God, yes, I believe these were the root causes and structural causes of inequality and poverty, I would have felt embarrassed. Because I couldn't really put my hand on my heart and say, I do believe these things are the root causes of inequality and poverty. But as I say, they read like an NGO policy playbook, to be honest, and that didn't really do it for us. Why did we need to exist? Everybody else is in this sort of shit. So we did what we call the strategic reset, where we went back to basics about 4 months ago. Late June. So after 6 months, you can imagine our funders love this. After 6 months of one way of describing our issues and our things, we went back and we completely redesigned it. And now we have this. So, from 7 issues to 5 themes. And I can't take you through all of them because we don't have enough time, but the important ones that I'd like to just point out, this one, the architecture of wealth extraction. By the way, this isn't a public-facing language. We're still working on that. But this is basically the concept, the frame underneath that we are going to try to promote. The architecture of wealth extraction is basically trying to upend people's understanding of what economies and the political economies and structures are for. What is the purpose of the economies that we see around us and the way we organise ourselves? The common understanding, at the kind of deeper assumption level, is that the economy is something that we organise ourselves by. It's where the jobs come from, it's where the money comes from, it's generally a positive, if irritating and annoying, and never good enough force. And what we're saying is wrong. The economy as it is organised today, its primary purpose is to centralise wealth and power. That's its primary purpose. So we can't, this throws a spanner in the narrative, all this narrative that the food system is broken, the economy is broken. Rubbish. They're doing exactly as they were designed to do, but just what they were designed to do was not provide the greatest welfare for everybody. So you can't complain when it does what you want it to do. And if you go into your question, your problem with that mindset, you are going to come out with a much smaller set of solutions and a much more reduced idea of what needs to change. So actually, and we talk about the architecture of wealth extraction, by which we mean tax regimes, meta-economic policy in individual countries and globally. We mean the debt system. We mean aid system. Aid system is very much part of this wealth extraction industry. So that's that. Okay. The only other point I'll make about those things is we want to take ideology head on. Ideology is something that we think most NGOs are scared of for very good reason, because they will lose funding, they will get into political trouble if they start talking about it. But actually, as Zizek says, behind everything is ideology. And actually changing frames is about changing ideology. Shifting values powers is about changing ideology. And we think that's about as hard a job as you can get. So unless it's up there with everything else in terms of priorities and focuses, we're never going to do the job. So we put ideology right up there with our things. Okay. Finally, this is really a plug for later on this afternoon. Being able to measure cultural change, the metrics of cultural change, which is essentially the job that we're in, is really, really, really difficult, and we get it almost entirely wrong. We rely on polls and we rely on focus groups, and they're basically rubbish measures. And they don't tell you anything like you need to know. If you want to know better ways to measure, better cultural metrics that are possible, we're holding a session this afternoon, this evening, with Joan, who is doing incredible work with mimetic theory, looking at data-intensive ways to do it, which are available to all of us. They're cheap, they're easy. What you need is the ability to use them. You don't need to be a millionaire to have them. So that's what I think. Okay. And I want to leave you with a hopeful story, because that's an awful lot to take in. Picture of species. There's a guy at Harvard called Robert Keegan. He's a professor of adult development. And he's adult development is in individual development, not international development. Okay. And if you start to look at the humanity as a species, if you can step back far enough and analyse the activities of the last 100 years of humanity, you actually start, he says, if it was any other species, we would say what you've got there is a species that is working extremely hard to do something very specific. And he says there are two things that have happened. One is we have started reproducing life at an astonishing rate. It took us 90,000 years to get to 1.5 billion people, and 100 years to get to 7 billion people. Now, the rote answer is it's technological improvements. Yes, but why? There is a why behind all those things. And he says, this is only a hypothesis of his. He doesn't say this is the answer, but it's a hope. So, extending reproducing life at an astonishing rate, and extending the lifespan. We are now, 50 years ago the average lifespan was about 50 years, now it's about 75 years. That's a profound change in the life experience. What happens? Why could that be? Why might that be a positive thing for a species to do, other than at an individual level? And he says, in adult development terms, there are 5 common stages of development. And the 5th stage of development, that people only attain over the age of 40, and only about 1% of the population even then, is what he calls the self-transforming mind, which is the mind that can hold conflicting concepts at the same time in their brain. It is the highest form of problem-solving mind. And his hypothesis is that just as we are, at a species level, creating the problems at a planetary level that could destroy our species, so it might just be that we are creating the conditions amongst ourselves necessary to solve it. The 6th stage of human development is the stage of egolessness, where the individual transcends. He says the distortion of subjectivity is removed, and the individual just transcends the ego. I'll leave you on that point because that is the point where science meets spirituality. I'll take you back to that point. Because spirituality, every single tradition says, the point of humanity is to transcend the ego, to commune with transcendent, to commune with someone beyond themselves. And in Robert Kegan's work, it's one of several areas where we're finding science and spirituality touching on a conclusion. Finished. Okay.